Welcome to the SufferSooner podcast. Follow along with three average people doing some above average things. We have jobs, families, and we enjoy pushing ourselves to be the best that we can be in gravel, triathlon, and endurance sports. We've made mistakes, conquered what was once impossible to us, and pushed through barriers to come out the other side stronger, smarter, and more willing to find the truth in the dark places that only suffering can take you. Sometimes in life you have to be willing to push yourself in an attempt to get it over faster, and thus you may just have to suffer sooner. Well, welcome to episode 10, guys. Today we are going to talk about power zones and heart rate zones. Just the general, what it means, when your coach gives you a zone 2 ride, what does that mean to the coach? What does that mean to the athlete? What does that mean to, everybody? So we're just going to talk about how to train and use zones and get the most out of your workouts. So how's it going, guys?
It's going, man. How you doing?
Good. Doing good.
Yeah.
Greetings from the Florida Keys, friends. There are people riding their bikes on highways above the ocean here. It's wild.
There you go.
On location.
Yeah.
We were trying to figure out what we're going to talk about for the episode, doing some of our little show prep here. And when we decided to do the training zones, it's hitting a little too close to home today, Travis. I did a VO2 max. Well, it was supposed to be a VO2 max workout today. And I got to say, I felt like I left a lot on the table. So this is a very timely subject. It's almost like we're going to get some live coaching on the air here. I like it.
Yeah. So, so we were talking about your power zones. And so the best way I can describe power zones is just, it's kind of like for all of us to get on the same page, right? When I say zone 1, how many zones are there in the total, how many total zones am I talking about? How many, how big is zone 1? It's all this stuff, but usually as a coach, I usually talk about, I do a 7-zone model for the bike and then a 5-zone model for the heart rate. And so what we're talking about is, where does that, if you're talking about power on the bike, where does zone 1 fall? And for me, it's about 65% below and below is your zone 1 of your FTP. So I guess my question is to you guys, being athletes, is, when we're talking about zones, what do you often equate to zone 1?
Go ahead, Serena.
Again, I'm going to reveal myself as one of the laziest people out there. Zone 1 is whatever my computer or Training Peak says it is. If it's in the green, then I'm in the right zone. I don't pay really close attention to those numbers. I do feel like I can tell you where zone 2 is when I'm running. Somebody pounded into my head what that heart rate number is, but I am pretty reliant on technology, especially when it comes to cycling zones, either based off of VO2 max workout or an FTP test. I pretty blindly follow whatever my technology is telling me is the right number.
Well, I think the good thing is there is some correlation between the training zone and sort of that perceived effort. So I don't think you're too far off, Serena, and there's nothing wrong with leveraging your bike computer to kind of help you out with that. I think for me, when I think about zone 1, I think of that is the easiest of easy paces, right? So you think about, you can hold that pace more than all day. You're not really breathing too heavy. And while, I would look to quantify it as something as a percent of my FTP, I think for all intents and purposes, for most people out there, zone 1 is going to be, you're carrying on a conversation, you're having a good time, you're laughing, you're enjoying the day. Maybe a little bit more work than just, riding along the beach, but not much more work than that.
Yeah. My go-to kind of idea of zone 1 is that I'm not going to change into my cycling kit to go and do zone 1.
Yeah.
Like I can ride it in, a pair of shorts and some regular trainers. I can just, put on whatever I'm wearing and know that I can ride to the corner store and I'm not gonna, you know, uh,
Is that why you show up to our group rides in shorts? Are you just trying to flex? Is that what it is?
exactly. That's what it is. I'm just show up. I'm just like, this is zone 1 today, guys. Don't worry about
I'm
it.
like, I wonder why Travis is wearing t-shirt and shorts. He's not even in a kit.
Yeah, I mean,
Doesn't make sense now.
it's basically just, zone 1 is just that kind of like it is. You're just moving the pedals around. So then we get to, and the thing with these zones too is, any coach that that you work with, a lot of times, what I tend to do is I tend to manipulate your zone. So like Serena, so Training Peaks will take your zones from your FTP and they'll say, well, at 105% to 95% of your FTP, that's sweet spot. From 95, or which is zone 4. Then from
high zone
95,
3, low zone 4. Yeah.
exactly. See how we're getting to it now.
See?
And so then you have 95 to 85, and that's zone 3. And you have zone 2, which is 85 to 75, and then 75 below is zone 1, is Training Peaks. And they all kind of separate it out. And a lot of times Garmin, Training Peaks, some of the other softwares, they just do it percentage wise. So like, Danny, we were talking today, I asked you, what your VO2 max rides were, and I could deduce that that they just started your effort at 130% of your FTP. And as a coach, when I wrote back to you, it's basically like, I know you as an athlete, so therefore I know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and I can start you at a different percentage. And that's part of what I do with Serena, is that I have no problem giving Serena like the high end of her efforts, because I know she'll just hit the number that's supposed to be there. So I really have to pay attention to where she's feeling, she is in these zones. And so that's why like, you can't just go off of like Garmin and Training Peaks, because it's all a percentage of your FTP, and not everybody is exactly the same. It's kind of like they're trying to fit you inside the bell curve. And so we always try to get everybody going, just where perceived effort, your heart rate, how does that line up, all that stuff. So like take example for zone 2, which is usually between 75, 85, could be 65, depending on what kind of athlete you are of your FTP. So for Serena, since she's more of a seasoned athlete, her zone 2 is pushed up a little bit higher into like 80% of her FTP, because her heart rate on the bike reflects that she's in zone 2. And so she can go to a higher power and still stay in zone 2. Whereas if we lowered her power down to where Training Peaks tells me to put it, then it's not in zone 2. It's almost, it's like high zone 1.
Yeah, you're not getting quite the response that you're looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think zone
gentlemen,
2
I
also.
feel like we should walk this back one step. So you all are assuming that we have an accurate FTP, which has always been a very mysterious number to me. How do you guys feel about getting an accurate FTP? And especially for people who aren't super seasoned, I don't know that I could go out and do a true 20-minute hard effort like that. So what do you think the best way is to get to the best FTP?
Yeah,
for me, I guess, guess.
Yeah, I think we can get to that here, because you think about, we're kind of working our way up to it. So like the zone 2 would be sort of that all day pace, the pace that you can hold for multiple hours throughout the day. And Serena, I think you bring up a really good point, because your FTP is technically your functional threshold power. Right? That's what it stands for, and that is technically it's defined as your zone 4 point threshold. So zone 3 would, skip. We went from zone 1, zone 2. Now zone 3 would be sort of your endurance pace, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in just a little bit. Zone 4 being your threshold, zone 5 being VO2 max, and zone 6 being
anaerobic capacity.
Anaerobic, and then anaerobic capacity, and then zone 7 is you're giving it everything you got. So
yeah, it's like a neuromuscular thing. Think of like max sprint, as fast as you can spin the pedals, as hard as you can go before like your body doesn't fire correctly and messes stuff up. So
that's right.
It's just basically everything you got.
Yeah. So when you talk about like how do you establish FTP, that's a really good question, because there are so many real quick, there's so many protocols. There's so many protocols out there for it that can be confusing, and there's a lot of different ways to calculate FTP. And we talked on another podcast about even with like Trainer Road having the AI capability to detect your FTP. And here's the reality: is your FTP is probably not the same day over day. It's a number to be used for consistency, to set consistency across your training, and to also be used as a point in time to reflect where your fitness is, where it was, and how you've adapted since the last time you tested. But I think people get caught up and fixated on FTP to the point that it almost can get in the way of your training, and that's what you have to be really careful for. Sorry, Travis, but go ahead. I think that's, there's a lot we could talk about with FTP, but
ahead, I mean, Travis. that could be its own episode. I mean, like some people, like you said, talk about FTP as your functional threshold power. Some people call it your maximal steady state. So where your lactate buffering is you're producing and buffering the same amount. So it's basically like, the lactate builds in your muscles, and you can, in your ability to buffer that is, usually that can be considered what your threshold is. There's different, definitions for what it is. I usually just look at it as, there's some people that take it as, 95% of your 20-minute power, which is what Serena was talking about. Some people do it as the 1 minute maximal effort on a ramp test. There's different formulas, and basically the thing is what I used to do when I first started coaching was that I would do a lot of FTP tests just so that I think athletes like to see progress in their capabilities. And so like an FTP test is a good number for them to like, last year I was 180 watts. And now this year at this time, now I'm like 200 watts. Whereas, you could have been that 200 watt athlete last year too. But as a coach, I'm developing the whole power curve, your 1 second, your 5 second, your 1 minute, your 5 minute, your 20 minute, your 30 minute, your all of those powers under the zone. Like I look more at your power curve than I do your FTP, if that makes sense. So I do value FTP, and I think it is a good number for people to have. But it's kind of one of those things like, work on your weaknesses and um, and keep working on your strengths, and overall you'll develop into a better athlete. You're like, to put it in like a baseball analogy, you don't practice just catching the ball, right? If you're a good catcher, like you should practice hitting the ball too. So work on where you're not good at.
Yeah, and I think too, I mentioned, people can get wrapped around, their FTP and let that get in the way. And I think you nailed it, Travis. The power curve is really important, especially depending on the type of event you're training for, because, your FTP doesn't really mean a whole heck of a lot. And again, I guess the sort of the athlete's definition of FTP would be, the power, theoretically, the power you can hold for 1 hour at maximum effort. And
Right. And if you
there
really
aren't
wanted to
many.
do an FTP test, go
Yeah.
hold what you feel is your maximum power for an hour.
For an hour. Yeah.
And then
go do
for
it.
an hour. And then you'll know exactly what that
Yeah.
FTP number
You'll
is.
know it for a
And I
couple of
feel like
days.
you guys make me do that. I remember being at a race and looking down and saying, holy cow, guys, I've been riding at over 200 watts for an hour and 10 minutes. And I
Mhm.
believe Travis's response was, well, maybe we should update your FTP.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you just discovered though, Serena, is that the FTP you had before was blocked more by mental stress than physical stress. And your FTP was actually higher than what you realized. And so you're a stronger rider than you realize. And that's again why I think FTP is just one part of the picture. And why it's important. I think Travis, you nailed it again. You nailed it with the, look at the whole power curve, because you're training for a something that's more of like an ultra endurance style event. The amount of power you can hold for 1 hour is not really that big of a deal. How much power can you hold for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 hours? Like, what's the maximum output you can put there? And that gets into your aerobic capacity. And, if depending on the course, it may require some anaerobic efforts. It's all those kinds of things that start to find their way into the formula that gives you like sort of what is your maximum power. At the end of the day, it's all about setting up your training zones in a way that get the right type of response from your breathing rate, your heart rate, your metabolic rate, all those things. It's trying to get the right type of response in the most efficient way possible through the training that you're doing in the time that you have. And so that's why we do these things, right? And so kind of tying it back to sort of what got us onto this subject earlier today was, Travis, when you're looking at your athletes and I think most other coaches, when you're looking at your athletes, training results, you're saying, okay, well, I set the target for this interval at, 130% of the FTP just to have, again, FTP is just being used to provide a baseline here. I set the interval at 130%, but I may or may not have seen the heart rate response I was looking for, or I may not have seen, over multiple intervals, I may not have seen the trend in the heart rate that I was looking for. Maybe the athlete is stronger, or maybe they're not as strong as they, maybe today wasn't the strongest day for them, right? So I think, maybe talk a little bit about when you look at the, especially when you're setting up intervals, what are you looking for in terms of the response generally? Is it heart rate? Is it their sustained power, repeatable power? Maybe talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah. So, when we're targeting a zone, I'm gonna use your data, Danny,
Sure.
just because we're talking about you. So I'm gonna put that up on the screen now. So,
this is the one.
This is the one. So there's two things that that usually stand out to me that show me what how your workout went. First is your recovery. So basically we look at your heart rate falling off of your effort.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing. Like, does it get almost all the way to the bottom? Does it come down to before, lower than what your warm up effort was? Does it come back down right before you hit the next interval? And so that's what we want to look at right there. So good recovery shows you're aerobically fit. You're at
Thank goodness.
the interval wasn't too long, wasn't too bad. Then when I zoom in, I'll look at your repeatable power, and I'll just kind of like cherry pick a couple extra to see that we're in the same ballpark. Usually you want to look at like maybe 10% off of whatever. So if you went from 280 and then you went to 260 something, then I would have been like, we would have had some efforts. But the other part is, how are you handling these efforts? What's your RPMs? What are you spinning at? 100. Here we go. Is that what was called for? And the thing is, to do most of these high end efforts, you have to spin the pedals fast. And then and then the last thing. So this 30 seconds on, a minute off, right? That's what
It
it
was
was.
a minute, excuse me, a minute on, 2 minutes off.
Yeah, minute on, 2 minutes off. So basically, you recovered well between sets. You
Mhm.
hit a power target repeatedly. You didn't have um, any kind of weird cadence issues where
Mhm.
you weren't ready for one, and then you ended up bogging down. And the last thing I look at is your trend of your heart rate peaks over time. So we
Mhm.
get to 155, 155, 156. 154,
Yep.
154.
Yep.
And then we go to the next set 155, 156, 158, 157. And then the last two
I bumped up.
you
Mhm.
bumped up because you weren't getting the response. So basically I feel like if you would have started out with this power, which is, what was that power? Let me zoom in. Let's say 300 watts.
Mhm.
I would imagine that at the end of these intervals, your heart rate would have been at 165, which is probably where it needed to be for your. And I'm just, again, Danny's not my athlete, so I don't know his numbers completely well, but I've trained with him enough to know that that's probably pretty close to what his zone
Yeah.
5 heart rate is.
Yeah, my threshold heart rate is closer to 168 or so, roughly.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
So,
yeah, so when I see zone 5 efforts or, zone 6 efforts even, by the 1 minute just really isn't quite long enough to get that type of response. So, I'm with you, like, upping the intensity to get that heart rate response is probably what I would wanna do if I were doing this set again, or increase the duration, right? So instead of
mhm,
doing 1 minute intervals, maybe it's 2 minute or 3 minute intervals, and
yeah,
then and then maybe it's still 1 or 2 or 2 minutes of rest in between, but stretch out those intervals a little bit to get the heart rate response because it's pretty clear here that the prescribed workout was not generating the response that I would have expected based on the type of workout that it was.
right.
And
Yeah, and then basically, like, what I would have been looking for is the first thing that we probably would have done, for the next time, is we would keep the interval length the same, raise the power up to about 300 watts, and then hopefully by the time you're at these last two intervals, you're at maybe 175,
mhm.
right?
Yep.
175 as you're topping out your heart rate, because you want to look at, like, this is accumulation of this VO2 max effort. So these are
That's right.
all, time and zone. And so we just want to make sure that each little heart rate peak is going up and up and up and up and up until you have a big recovery, you fully recover, and then it starts the whole chain over again. So,
What's interesting about this is, so you remember a few episodes back we talked about I was going to go with the paper training plan, right? The one that
mhm.
is
Yep.
published by Garmin as part of the Unbound materials. And so that's what I did, and I knew this would likely happen, right? That this is a paper plan, and this is why I think it's so important that if you're going to follow a paper plan, you should have a coach with you, or at least pay enough attention to your data and understand, hey, you should have pushed yourself a little harder here or back off there, and I think, these are the kind of adaptations that you need to make to plans in order for them to get the most out. Not that you don't get anything, 'cause, clearly I got more out of this workout than just sitting on the couch all day. But,
Right.
certainly could have gotten more, I think, out of this workout than what I did, and I felt that because I think right after I got done with the workout, I think I messaged you, Travis. I'm like, "Wow, that almost felt like cheating." Like, I don't remember a VO2 max workout that ever felt that easy. So
Yeah.
so it was kind of interesting to get done with that going, "Man, I could probably go out and ride another hour and a half just like it, and not even really, hurt too much." So
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is, like, maybe they give you 3 or 4 of these intervals, and you're not, you maybe the last two are the ones that get you into the zone
mhm,
that you're looking for, but these first two aren't. It's kind of weighing off that, the much response, how much, how do you elicit the response? And for you, having the power range as low as it is for this plan, which is a plan that, for most people, again, your goal is not to have a high VO2 max when you go into unbound, because that, it doesn't, I mean, having a high VO2 max is nice, but it's not going to be what helps you win the race.
You got to have the aerobic capacity and the
yes,
endurance to get through it. That's right.
the whole idea of having a VO2 max effort in your training plan now is that we're pushing your VO2 max away from your threshold, so that when you do have to go above your threshold, you're not going into VO2 max, because you only have a number of these little matches.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about matches in a race, if your VO2 is really close to your threshold, you're not going to have very many matches. But if your VO2 is way up here, where like my little pointer is, you can keep going into this and recovering, and into it and recovering throughout the day, until your VO2, your VO2 max is coming down and down and down. But it takes a long time to get there. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the thing, with these plans and stuff. They're just kind of like, they want you to succeed so that you feel confidence. The big thing about doing, these online plans and stuff is to build confidence. The same thing about when, I'm coaching an athlete, I'm building their confidence. I believe that they can do it. I have to make, they have to believe that they can do it. And so, here's a workout that I gave to an athlete today. It's a basic. Oh, look, Danny, it's almost the same thing.
It looks very familiar.
It looks very familiar, right? It's yeah. So, her heart rate, she reported back that these were a little bit too easy. So, I mean, even, I gave it to her. Probably what we'll end up doing is the same thing that we would do for you, is just add another set, and then we'll see how this area heart rate response and stuff. So, that's the thing with coaching and all that other stuff, is that, I'm constant. You have to constantly evaluate where you are, where you think you should be, how you're responding to the training. And the big thing that I harp on people with about training zones is that, does that zone feel like what it was supposed to be, like what it says on the 10? If it's supposed to be zone 2, were you able to talk through most of it? Were you was your heart rate in the right area? Was your did it feel like zone 2?
Yeah, I think this is why the dialogue between coach and athlete is so important. And we talked about this again in another episode, that this is what you pay a coach for. Like Serena, I think you mentioned a second ago, like, I just want to do what the computer tells me to do, or whatever number I'm supposed to hit, just tell me what it is and I'll go hit it. And that's exactly the mode you want to be in as an athlete. And that's why it's so important, I think, for most people to have access to a coach, and to make sure that they're getting the most out of it. If you're going to dedicate all this time into the workout, you might as well get the most out of it. And that's why, again, it's so important to have somebody who can look at the data objectively and really help sort of put things into perspective. But it only works if you get the feedback. And I think you just said it there a second ago, Travis, that your other athlete who said, hey, this felt pretty easy, so well, now you know how to adapt the plan. And those are things that computer software, like, yes, they can give you a survey at the end of the workout, but they're not going to be able to really understand, like, no, really, how did you feel even coming into the workout? Like, if you felt weak coming into the workout, that's important, because those are other stresses that just can't be calculated through a survey. So, yeah. So
one thing I'll say to that, though, too, is I always am saying, yep, I'm just going to go out and hit these numbers, but I'm also getting better at, sometimes those numbers are too hard for whatever reason. I've had a very stressful day. I didn't do a very good job fueling before the workout, whatever. So I also have to have some awareness of, okay, I understand that this is supposed to be a tempo ride, but like the other day, I could not hit that fourth interval and I knew I wanted to do a longer ride the next day. So it was, I was somewhat proud of myself to know that for whatever reason, that fourth interval was not for me. I shouldn't finish it. I was getting too high into zone 4 that I wasn't getting the value that was intended out of that workout. So I think as an athlete, you still have to have some basic awareness of where you are and what the
Mhm.
intent was.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
exactly. I mean, that's I reported back on your training peaks that sometimes you just have to live to fight another day. And I've been I've had that happen to me many a times during a workout where I'm like, this threshold does not feel like threshold. This feels way harder. Or, you're like, oh, this is a tempo ride. This tempo ride feels like threshold. Like this feels way too freaking hard. And, on those days when you feel like that, I always say, um, work in like a triangle. Like, what does the power say, what do you feel, and what does your heart rate say? And like you were saying on your training peaks, Serena, you said, I didn't feel, I this felt way too hard and my heart rate was way too high, so I decided I couldn't hit the power, and I decided to throw in the towel. And I was like, that was perfect, because you're just kind of yes, some days you get on the bike and you're like, man, I just turning the pedals feels excruciating. But is my heart rate okay? Is my power numbers okay? Okay, well then I'm just kind of being, a little baby. But some days you get on there and you're like, this is hard. My heart rate says it's hard, and I'm just too stressed. And so like knowing that as an athlete is huge for sure. Just because you can you saved yourself um, that interval that could have cost you being able to ride the next day. And that's the long ride that we did the next day was way more important than that one interval of big gear work. So, sorry, I got like something in my throat.
Yeah, so I think that I think then, kind of going back to workouts that we talk about the training zones and the prescribed workouts and sort of that how should you feel at the end of the workout and why is that important? I mean, you got to remember a lot of these plans are put together to elicit like cumulative fatigue, right? So like today's workout being for me and the plan I'm doing. Today's workout was supposed to be VO2, I should say zone 5 intervals, and it's supposed to generate some accumulation of fatigue so that tomorrow when I do my zone 3 rides, I'm riding on, somewhat fatigued legs and learn what it's like to ride zone 3 for, lengthy durations on a little bit tired legs, not wrecked legs, but at least tired. And now I'm probably not gonna get that sort of feeling, but I do think that when we get
Well, I
into
mean,
like
yeah,
the weekend.
I think you definitely touch the zone, and
Mhm,
the other thing too is we're not switches. We're,
that's true.
it's you we're working on faders. And a lot when I first started this whole thing, I used to, think that, oh, if I'm not exactly in the middle of this zone, it's the
It's a
whole
really good
thing's
point.
a freaking wash. And if I didn't hold it exactly,
Yeah.
20 minutes, then, that workout was just
Just a
worthless. And
waste of
that zone
time.
was,
I should
it's just a waste. Just throw it all away.
throw it
But
away.
no,
I should have just eaten popcorn on the couch.
yeah, I've very softened my view over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years of doing
I'm
this,
glad
and,
you
and
have,
just,
Travis. There's still part of me that's like, if I didn't hit the number I was supposed to hit, then I was a waste. It was, what did I do out
I
there?
know
Just
I tell my athletes too a lot. It's just, just have some grace. It's okay. It's, doing, slow miles are better than no miles, you
that's
know,
true.
and doing something is so much better than doing nothing. If that something is just turning the pedals over, then that's way better than just
It's all
not
part of
doing
that
it.
consistency, right? So,
Exactly. So,
yeah.
hitting your numbers, like I said, these zones, everybody feels like, oh, if I go 106% of my FTP, I'm in VO2 max. Well, not really.
Mhm.
You're probably still in threshold, depending on where you are that day, if you're feeling it. It's all this sliding back and forth of your energy system. So, just try to be, you know, again, with these zones, checking in with, yourself, does it feel like sufficiently like it should? Does it feel like, you know, if you're doing this effort, is it eliciting the response that you expect it to elicit? So
Yeah, I think it's important too, like you said, we're not robots. This isn't a video game. We're not just out here, able to repeat everything the perfect way every time. So I think keeping it in perspective, and guess what? We'll go out and ride, a long ride Saturday, and we'll ride Sunday, and I may get humbled a little bit and realize that, maybe I just was a little stronger than I realized today, and watch my heart rate skyrocket through the ride this weekend. So,
well, it's supposed to be warmer, so you have that. I mean,
yeah.
everything affects everything else. Like, what did you eat the night before? Did you, what did you how good was your sleep? What were you working out, and like maybe the time of day that you chose to train was optimal for you for that energy system, and it just felt easier. Like, um I can't do like hard VO2 max efforts. I just can't do them like before 10 a.m. Like, unless it's a race and you're
Unless
kind
it's a
of
race
all
day.
amped up unless it's race day and I have to do it. But like, if you give me a training plan and you're like, Travis, you got to go do VO2 max, and I'm like, cool, I'll do those at like 10:30 in the morning. That's usually my 10:30 to about 4 p.m. is VO2 max time. That's fine. I'll go do hard efforts then.
So what you're saying
But
is our next race, I should attack you before 10:30 a.m. so that I put you in the hole early. Got it.
yeah,
Good.
I mean, you can. It's fine. But it's just like I can't do those hard efforts early in the morning. It just for whatever
All right,
reason, I
Serena.
just I
We're at the next race. You and I, we're gonna go just nail VO2 max on Travis and just put the screws to him early.
Absolutely not, Danny. The only race I'm ever winning is one that starts at 7 p.m. because that's when I work out. I
yeah,
would win the
and
night triathlon every time. Mornings are
yeah,
not
I
my
mean,
thing.
Serena is like me. She just hates like the early mornings, just getting up. I mean, I don't mind the early morning. It's just when I have to do like hard work. But like she does her workouts in the evening, and I'm like, I don't even know how I could go to sleep, because I remember we have this place, the downtown airport, and we used to ride there on Thursdays, and sometimes we would go ham. Me and Danny would just be
Mhm.
racing everything around there, and the next thing I know, I'm like, it's 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, the ride's been over for about 2 hours, and I'm like, I'm still kind of wide awake and kind of really amped to go, and I would find it like I couldn't get to sleep till like midnight. So,
Sorry about that.
but yeah, no worries. So, but yeah, I mean, the big thing I want to say about zones too is know what's behind your zones, right? Like, there's physiological response to your training zones, right? And the thing is that Garmin, Training Peaks, all these places, they just use a percentage of whatever your FTP is, or for Garmin, it's sometimes your maximum heart rate. So if Garmin never finds out your maximum heart rate is 190 beats, well, it's going to start basing all your training zones off of that. But how many of us do a maximum heart rate test?
Mm.
Like, those things are
No, thank you.
excruciating.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
thank
like,
you.
no, thank you. Like, nobody wants to do that. So, if that's the way your Garmin is calculating your heart rate zones, then look into setting it yourself, or like looking at changing your percentages a little bit to reflect more of your personal style as an athlete. Like maybe you're a big diesel engine that can go all day, so maybe your zone, your all your way up to threshold is um be a lot larger. Like your zone 2 can go way into zone 3, and zone 3 can almost go up to your threshold, and your threshold can go even a little bit above your threshold, because you're kind of able to buffer a little bit more than that, than what's going on there. So, or maybe you're like a Cavendish who can sprint, and
Yeah.
your upper zones are huge. You go from like 130% of your FTP to almost like 180% of your FTP, and that's your VO2 max range. It's just
Wasn't
huge.
that the thing though? Like there's really, I mean, these are all these numbers we're throwing around. I mean, these are the averages for, the either the general athletic population. But
Yeah.
but there are other ways like you can go get, tested, get hooked up to the breathing machines and get your lactate testing and all that and figure out what your zones really are, because you bring up a really good point. Somebody who's just stronger physically, muscular strength has probably a much higher maximum power output, and so their FTP and all these zone percentages could be skewed by that
Yeah.
considerably. So for them to follow like you say Cavendish, or somebody who's a world class sprinter, or even just a very good average sprinter, for them to follow a 95 to 105% of FTP as sweet spot may not be right. Maybe their sweet spot is much higher than the FTP, or maybe it's much lower, but it may not
Yep.
be in that range. And I think that just gets back to like, I don't want to say how serious of an athlete are you, but how much do you want to pay attention to those things and try to get, again, maximum response out of the training time. I think for most of us, we're pretty good with just, I'll just do the percent averages. But as you kind of, we talk about this too, like when you first start out, you see the gains in your FTP very quickly, and then it kind of plateaus, and
Yep.
and then it's like it is so hard to squeeze out 5 more watts on that FTP. So then you start to care about things like, well, what is my lactate? Maybe I should go get tested. Maybe I should go get I mean, how many times have I said that to you, Trust? Maybe I should go get metabolic testing and figure out what
Yeah.
my carb to fat ratio is. I'm like, why do I care? I'm not a pro. I'm not getting paid for this, but yet I kind of wouldn't mind squeezing out maybe another 10 watts out of my FTP, and
Yeah.
it's
It's
it's crazy. So
it's one of those things that, like, let's take metabolic testing. Like, let's take you for example. You wanted to get metabolic testing, and you wanted to see, okay, where's my fat burning zone? Everybody talks about. That's why I want to ride in zone 2. Well, let's say that you're, just for whatever reason, your metabolic uh zone for that, you take the test, and now you find out exactly the wattage that turning point happens. So
mhm.
let's say it falls in zone 2, but now that zone 2's 75 to 85% of your um, FTP. Let's say it falls right at 81% is your maximum uh, fat burning zone, right?
Yep.
So now know, with that knowledge, that if you go at 81% or lower, you're burning all the fat.
Yep.
And so then that if you dip into the 82% to 85% and above, you're going more carbohydrate focused.
That's right.
That's part of, like, then you can go, okay, well, now all my zone 2, you can shift that zone 2 down to cover that area. And now, okay, now I know that this is my true measured physiological zone 2. And the thing is that it was measured at that point on that day. And then now you go out and you train. Let's say you train for 6 weeks, and and now you've adapted. Now you get retested, and chances are it's probably up. It's
Yeah.
moved up, And so, or let's say that conversely, you test, and now you're at 90% is where your zone or where your metabolic efficiency turn point is. And
Mhm.
so now you're from 90%, you're burning straight carbs. Well, now you can make that zone 3 or zone 2 so much bigger,
Right.
you know? So, having a metabolic, it's just another little piece to the puzzle, especially like your lactate testing. You can find where that point is, but these are all on sliding scales every day. It's
Yep.
different, it can change depending on what you eat, how you sleep, all that other stuff, how stressed out you are, how much kids or your spouse and all that other stuff, and travel, everything
Right.
else, what's going on. It's a sliding scale, but knowing those little points, you're like, okay, well, I know around this point, this is where this is where my efficiency is. So I'm going to train maybe, if in the first example we said 81% is your metabolic efficiency point. You're like, well, I'm going to train 80% and below to get the most amount of my fat burning. So, which is
Good stuff.
good. I mean, yeah.
Speaking of children in life, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure today, but one of my kids is losing his mind. So I will be signing off, probably in zone 3 heart rate because I can hear screaming behind me.
Well, good luck.
Have a great day. I'll see you on Saturday.
All right, we'll see you. So yeah, and the thing with zones too, and this is probably gonna sound like we're beating a dead horse, but like it's just kind of like it's just a way of all of us being able to talk to each other. Is really, was it easy? Was it hard? Was it medium? It's just ways of
Well,
describing the effort that we need.
yeah, I think that's the key. It's that, anytime the beauty of power zones, and I've learned this several years ago as I was first getting into training, especially with cycling, is the beauty of power zones is that if we're all in zone 3, we're all working equally as hard because your zone 3 and my zone 3 feel the same.
Yep.
And they should be the same. Doesn't mean we're going the same speed or we're putting the same power output, but it means we're working just as hard as each other. And I think that's the beauty of it, and that's what makes these plans like, sort of scale between different athletes. But it also allows us, like you said, talk the same language. Like, hey, man, I had a really tough zone 5, VO2 max ride today. Yeah, I know VO2 max really stinks. Or you can, and so it's really great because it does allow you to sort of get ideas from other athletes too. Like, hey, how do you, when you've really got to stretch out that VO2 max, which, theoretically you can only hold a VO2 max for what, 5 to 7 minutes is the theoretical maximum. So if you're holding an effort for 10 minutes, like your VO2 max is probably higher than what you thought. You know what I mean?
And
So,
and the funny thing about that too is, are you going to go out and do a max 6-minute max effort?
right.
And
Right.
and for you, since you're a seasoned athlete, like you know what this is kind of feels like, you could probably do that.
Yeah.
You could probably get pretty relatively close. But for some other people, like they don't know how hard these hurt, so they like giving them something that's like a 5-minute effort.
Mhm.
Some people are they don't know, that they can't hold it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that their VO2 max is low or anything. It just means that they're not used to that kind of effort, so they don't know. Like if you asked me to go and hold a 6-minute effort, I would probably not do very well because it's been a
Mhm.
long time since I've held a 6-minute effort. I
Yeah.
can do probably like a 3-minute effort and a 2-minute effort really well, but 6 minutes, 5 minutes, it'll be hard for me to dial that in.
Right.
So, it's just, being being able to know what those feel like and know I'd probably get relatively close. But you just you the thing is like you don't have to do these 5-minute max tests to know your VO2 max. What's nice about the zone model is that, well, I know it's somewhere between 130 and 170 of my
Right.
FTP. So I'm going to start at 130 and then I'm going to bump it up, a couple of beat or a couple of watts here and there until I get to a place where I feel like, yeah, this is about it.
Yep.
So
well, it's
yeah.
it's a lot of fun. I mean, you can get really deep into the numbers and the science of all of it, and we barely even scratch the surface on some of this stuff. And obviously, we know a lot about what we've learned firsthand. What we've read from different sources, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the experiences, in my opinion, and so you know, just having ridden so much over the last few years and just scoured my own data, I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on where my zones are. Yet every single season, you still find yourself like questioning, like, well, should I be taking this approach? I take that approach, and it's just part of the journey, right? Just trying to figure this stuff out, and it's a lot of fun. It definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, I love the data and stuff like that, and listeners, don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm like going. I don't go by like FTPs. Is that I look at everybody's data so much that when Serena goes, she's like, well, I make her do FTP tests, but I feel sometimes that she holds back a little because a lot of times I see her go harder in like a race situation or like a a training situation harder than what
Mhm.
she should be capable of doing if her FTP is set correctly. So, um, and like I say, that could just be the day and all that other stuff. But you see that as a coach, you just look at the numbers, and you start to see like, okay, this person's FTP has gone up, so I can almost tell them, my athletes that oh, your FTP is up, and it's probably this, and then they go and take FTP test, and they're like, oh yeah, it said exactly what you said. It's like, yeah, okay, well,
Kind of done this before.
yeah, it's almost like I've done this before. Yeah, exactly. Like, and then when you, but it's one of those things that like I do love the numbers so much that I do want to invest in getting a lactate uh, meter
Mhm.
in the future here and start lactate testing. Myself just for curiosity's sakes, and some of my athletes to make sure everything's kind of dialed in, and and going from there. So
Might be a good project for the summer. So for
yeah,
sure.
definitely for sure. Because
Cool.
it's just nice to know that like especially with lactate testing, you can you basically know the zones that day, that at that time, and
Mhm.
because a lot of times, like if you run, let's say, zone 3, eventually that'll turn into a threshold effort if
Yep.
you run it long enough. And so like when you you- like let's say your coach, Danny said, you need to go out and ride 6 hours at zone 3, and you're like, okay. And so you start at your power target, conservative at 85% of your FTP, and you kind of go up to, you're kind of cruising in that area, and then you get to about, I don't know, 4 hours in, and everything starts to feel insanely hard. And then if you had a lactate or somebody who could take your lactate reading, we could measure your lactate, and then we would know what your threshold lactate would be, and then we could be like, oh yeah, you need to back it down.
Mhm.
You're in zone 4, you're not in zone 3 anymore. So then now that you can back it down, even though your heart rate and your power are going to be in zone 3, your body is saying, hey, I'm in zone 4.
Yeah, I think you
So
just described a couple of races for me last year.
yeah, so
I didn't need a lactate test to figure out I was going too hard into zone 4.
going too hard, yeah.
Good stuff. Well, it's been a fun topic. I know it gets, like I say, it gets pretty deep into it, but I think it's a
Oh
good way
yeah.
to relate, like, even if you don't really understand all the data that's coming at you from all these different devices. I mean, hopefully just, having sort of the walkthrough we did earlier will help some folks out, because I think it's really important to, again, don't overanalyze your data, but just understand enough about it and be willing to give feedback to your coach or document your own feedback for yourself, and be willing to make adjustments to the plan, and keep everything in a perspective. I think it's good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. All right, man.
All right.
Well, next week, another fun topic, I'm sure.
You got it. Like we're
All right, man.
we're all wrapped up for today. Suffer complete.
Yeah, Suffer complete.
All right.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you have ideas for topics, questions, or would like coaching, please email SufferSooner@gmail.com. And remember, sometimes you just have to suffer sooner.